Golden leaves blanketed the cobblestone streets of Willow Creek, casting the town in a soft autumn glow. But tonight, the peaceful charm was broken by howling winds, signaling an approaching storm. Larissa Smith was no stranger to solitude. Orphaned at a young age, she had spent years working tirelessly, doing odd jobs until she saved enough to open Clay & Co., her own handcrafted pottery shop. It wasn't just a business, it was her sanctuary. The wind roared louder. A luxury sedan pulled up and came to a sudden stop outside her shop. Raymond Miller, a renowned architect, stepped out, his coat billowing in the storm. Rain pelted down in heavy sheets, blurring the streets beyond. "I'm sorry, the storm is too strong to drive through, and I think I'm lost, and my GPS isn't working. Can I take shelter here for a bit?" Glancing at the torrential rain, Larissa pushed open the door, wordlessly inviting him in, leaving the raging storm behind as they stepped into the warmth of her shop. Inside Clay & Co., the crackling fireplace cast a golden glow, pushing back the cold creeping in from the storm outside. Shelves lined with delicate pottery gleamed under the dim lighting, turning the small shop into a haven against the raging winds. Larissa brewed 2 cups of tea, the scent of herbs curling through the air, a quiet contrast to the violent downpour beyond the windows. Raymond shrugged off his soaked coat, rolling his shoulders as warmth seeped into his skin. When Larissa slid a cup toward him, he glanced up, noticing for the first time the quiet beauty in her features, the rich darkness of her hair, the depth in her eyes, like autumn leaves drifting over still water. Their conversation started with polite exchanges, but soon words carried more weight. Larissa spoke of her past, growing up without a family, working tirelessly until she found solace in shaping clay, molding something whole out of something broken. Raymond listened, not just with his ears, but with something deeper, something unspoken. He had met many people, yet none like her, a woman strong enough to stand on her own, yet gentle enough to turn her pain into something beautiful. "I've spent my life building grand things," Raymond admitted, his voice low, eyes flickering in the firelight. "And yet, sometimes, I feel like I don't belong in the world I created." Outside, the storm raged on. Rain pounded against the windows, wind howled through the trees, but inside this little shop, the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them. A flicker of something unspoken passed between them, a pull neither had anticipated, a connection that needed no explanation. And as the night deepened and the storm refused to relent, they let themselves surrender to whatever it was that had drawn them together. 5 years had passed since that stormy night, yet the imprint it left on Larissa Smith's life had never faded. When Raymond walked away that morning, she had wondered, just for a fleeting second, if things would have been different had she asked for his full name, if she had known where he was from, what he did, if she had kept even the smallest thread to trace him back one day. But she hadn't. At the time, she believed it was nothing more than a passing encounter, a fleeting moment shared between two strangers, destined to part as quickly as they had met. Only when she found out she was pregnant did Larissa realize a part of that night would stay with her forever. She had no idea where to begin searching for Raymond. No number, no name beyond what he had casually given her, no clue as to who he really was. All she had was the memory of deep amber eyes, a voice rich and steady, and the feel of strong hands that had once traced warmth over her skin in the flickering glow of firelight. There were moments she considered looking for him, but where would she even start? What would she say to a man who might not even remember her? For 5 years, Larissa had built a life with her daughter Beatrix, a child who had inherited the same striking golden brown eyes as the man from her past. She had never spoken of Beatrix's father, never told a soul about that stormy night, accepting that one day, when the time was right, she would find a way to explain the missing piece in their family. But fate has a way of rewriting even the most carefully guarded stories. That evening, beneath the golden glow of an autumn sunset, Larissa received a wedding invitation from her best friend, Amelia Parker. Amelia's younger sister was marrying a successful architect, a man Larissa had never met. When Beatrix tugged at her sleeve, eyes brimming with excitement as she asked if she could come along, Larissa smiled, running her fingers gently through her daughter's soft curls, and nodded. The wedding was held at Grand Haven Hotel, the most luxurious venue in town. Sheer white curtains fluttered gently in the breeze, Crystal chandeliers cast shimmering reflections over the silk-draped chairs, creating an atmosphere that was straight out of a dream. Beatrix clutched Larissa's hand tightly, her amber eyes gleaming with excitement as they stepped inside the grand hall. "Mommy, it looks just like a castle in a fairy tale," she whispered in awe. Larissa smiled, squeezing her daughter's hand gently. She felt slightly out of place in all this grandeur, but nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. As Amelia guided her to her seat, Larissa's gaze naturally drifted toward the altar, where the groom stood. Her entire world stopped. The music, the chatter, the rustling of dresses, all of it faded into the background as Larissa's breath caught in her throat. The name she had just heard from the officiant's introduction echoed in her mind. Raymond Miller. No, it couldn't be. But even as denial flooded her mind, her eyes told her the truth. The man standing at the altar, the groom, the one moments away from marrying another woman, was the father of her child. Her fingers instinctively tightened around Beatrix's hand. "Mommy, the groom is really handsome," Beatrix whispered, oblivious to the storm raging inside Larissa. Her pulse pounded. What was she supposed to do? Turn around and leave? Pretend she hadn't just stumbled into the most impossible situation of her life? Or should she step forward and face the man she had kept a secret from for 5 years? But before she could make a choice, Beatrix suddenly pulled her hand away and darted toward the altar. Larissa's heart stopped. "Beatrix, come back." But her daughter was already halfway to the front, completely unaware that she had just shattered the illusion of a perfect wedding. The entire hall fell into stunned silence as Beatrix stopped directly in front of the groom. Hundreds of eyes followed the little girl in hushed bewilderment. "Are you the man who builds pretty buildings that help the earth?" she asked, her clear voice ringing out in the quiet room. A few chuckles rippled through the guests. Raymond, startled by the unexpected interruption, smiled slightly as he crouched down to her level, about to answer when, "Then can you marry my mommy? She's really pretty and makes the best cookies ever." This time no one laughed. A thick, suffocating stillness settled over the room. Guests exchanged confused glances. The bride, Vanessa, turned pale. Raymond's brows furrowed as he glanced over the sea of faces, until his eyes landed on her. For the first time in 5 years, his gaze met Larissa's. Time stopped. There were no words, no explanations needed. His mind raced as he looked at the little girl before him, then back at Larissa. And suddenly, the truth became undeniable. This child was his daughter. And Raymond Miller had been completely unaware. Until now. The room felt frozen in time, an eerie silence thickening the air. Every pair of eyes locked onto Raymond, yet he saw no one but the woman and child standing in the aisle. His breath hitched, heart pounding as his gaze met Larissa's, then dropped to the little girl clutching her hand. The world blurred around him. The child's golden brown eyes, so achingly familiar, stared up at him with innocent curiosity. A memory from 5 years ago flashed through his mind. The way firelight had danced in Larissa's gaze that night, the warmth of her touch, the unspoken connection they had shared. And now, he was a living, breathing piece of that night, standing before him. His hands trembled at his sides. No words left his lips, but deep in his bones, he already knew. This little girl was his daughter. His breath caught in his throat. The wedding ring in his hand suddenly felt meaningless. Vanessa stood stiffly at the altar, her face drained of color, while guests exchanged hushed whispers. The once perfect ceremony now cracked beyond repair. Larissa wanted to pull Beatrix away, but before she could move, Raymond stepped down from the altar, his steps slow but unwavering. He couldn't look away from her, couldn't let her slip through his fingers again. His voice came out hoarse, thick with too many emotions at once. "Larissa, the little girl, is she—" He couldn't even finish the sentence, but his eyes held every unspoken question, the pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known was incomplete falling into place. Larissa swallowed hard and gave a slow nod. There was no point in running anymore. Raymond inhaled sharply, his features shifting from shock to realization to something far heavier. 5 years. 5 whole years. He had a daughter in this world and he never even knew. His gaze locked onto Beatrix, the little girl who tilted her head curiously, waiting for his response. Vanessa suddenly stepped forward, her voice trembling with anger and humiliation. "Raymond, what the hell is going on? Do you know this woman?" Raymond's eyes never left Larissa, but this time his voice was firm, unwavering. "Yes, I know her." There was no hiding from it, no pretending anymore, because the truth was standing right in front of him, flesh and blood, with eyes identical to his own. Vanessa let out a sharp breath, her expression twisting before she turned on her heel, storming down the aisle, the train of her wedding dress dragging behind her as her family hurried to follow her. The wedding was over, the engagement broken. Without another word, the room erupted into hushed chaos. Guests murmured anxiously, but Raymond heard none of it over the roaring in his ears, his heartbeat hammering against his ribs. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he lowered himself to one knee before Beatrix, his eyes softening as he looked at the little girl up close for the first time. His voice dropped to a near whisper, as if afraid that one wrong move might shatter the moment. "Hi there, sweetheart." Beatrix blinked at him, then tilted her head before asking in the most innocent voice, "Are you a superhero?" A flicker of a smile ghosted across Raymond's lips, but his voice was thick with emotion as he replied, "No, sweetheart, but I promise I'll do everything I can to be someone you can be proud of." Larissa turned away, blinking back tears. Raymond walked out of the hotel amidst hushed whispers and stolen glances, but none of it mattered. He couldn't stand there for another second when his heart was being torn between two realities. One was the life he had planned with Vanessa. The other was the truth staring him in the face. The little girl with amber eyes wasn't a coincidence. He knew that, he felt it in his very bones. He drove aimlessly through the city lights, his mind a blur, before finally stopping outside Vanessa's house. When she opened the door, her expression was a mix of hurt and anger, but Raymond wasn't here to make excuses. He simply looked at her for a long moment before speaking in a quiet yet resolute voice. "I'm sorry, Vanessa. I should have said this sooner, but I can't lie to myself anymore. There's a little girl out there who needs me, and I have to go find her." There were no justifications, no attempts to soften the truth. He didn't expect forgiveness. He only knew that this time he had to do the right thing. As he turned away, he didn't look back, because what he was searching for was somewhere else. The next morning, he stood in front of Larissa's house, an unfamiliar weight settling in his chest. In his hands was a teddy bear and a sketchbook, gifts for the little girl he had yet to truly meet. When the door opened, Beatrix stood there, wide-eyed, taking in the stranger before her as if trying to piece together the man from her mother's stories. "Are you my dad? Mom told me about you. Welcome home." Raymond's breath hitched, emotions slamming into him all at once. His knees buckled as he lowered himself to her level, voice thick with the weight of the moment. "Yes, sweetheart, and I want to be part of your life, if you'll have me." Beatrix pursed her lips deep in thought as if deciding on something of great importance. Then, without warning, she threw her tiny arms around his neck, warmth radiating from her small frame into his very soul, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay, can we go for ice cream?" Raymond let out a shaky laugh, one that felt more like a release than amusement. He wasn't crying, but he felt like something inside him had just been healed when he looked up. Larissa was still standing there, tears glistening in her eyes, but her smile never fading. In the days that followed, Raymond moved in with them for the first time in his life. He understood what a home truly meant, not the penthouses or the million-dollar projects, but the clumsy breakfast attempts in the kitchen, the morning school drop-offs, the quiet evenings watching movies together, the late afternoons on the porch listening to Larissa talk about her day, and realizing he wasn't just learning to be a father, he was learning to love. And this time he knew without a doubt he would never let his family slip away again. That evening, Raymond stood at the doorway, quietly watching the scene unfold before him. Beatrix sat cross-legged on a small rug in the living room, her tiny feet swinging in the air as she concentrated on her drawing beside her. Larissa smiled softly, watching her daughter with quiet adoration. It was such a simple moment, yet it made Raymond's chest tighten. This was his family. This was where he belonged. Beatrix looked up and saw him standing there. Her amber eyes lit up as she waved him over. "Daddy, come here, I made this for you." Raymond stepped forward and knelt beside her. In her small hands was a drawing of a house, with 3 figures standing in front of it: a little girl, a mother with long hair, and a tall man holding their hands. The colors were bright and cheerful, but what made Raymond's throat tighten was the words carefully written beneath it: "My family." He gently squeezed his daughter's shoulder, his voice thick with emotion. "Can I keep this, sweetheart?" Beatrix nodded eagerly, then tilted her head. "Will you stay here forever?" The innocent question made Raymond pause. He turned to Larissa, searching her eyes for an answer. There was uncertainty there, hesitation, but also a fragile hope. He had lost them once, and he wouldn't let it happen again. Looking back at Beatrix, he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I'll stay if you and Mommy will have me. I want to be a part of our family if you'll let me." Beatrix thought for a moment, then beamed before launching herself into his arms, her tiny arms wrapping tightly around his neck, her breath warm against his skin as she whispered, "Then you have to make me breakfast every day." Raymond laughed, a deep, unrestrained sound as he glanced at Larissa. She was smiling too, her eyes glistening not with sadness this time, but with happiness. In the days that followed, Raymond learned how to be a father he accepted. His clumsy attempts at making breakfast, the burnt pancakes that Beatrix still cheered for. He drove her to school, became her bedtime storyteller, and helped Larissa fix up the front porch. In the golden hues of the setting sun, he realized happiness wasn't found in multi-million-dollar projects or high-rise apartments. It was here, in this small house, with the 2 people he loved most. One evening, after Beatrix had fallen asleep, Raymond led Larissa outside under the starlit sky. He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers in a silent promise. "Thank you for letting me come back." Larissa held his gaze for a long moment before leaning against his shoulder. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Welcome home, Raymond." And this time, Raymond knew for certain he had finally found where he truly belonged. That afternoon, Raymond and Beatrix sat in their favorite ice cream shop, the little girl happily enjoying her strawberry sundae, her legs swung back and forth as she ate. Then suddenly, she looked up at him, her amber eyes filled with a rare seriousness. "Daddy, why don't you marry Mommy?" Raymond froze for a moment, her words striking him like a wake-up call. Larissa had already given him a home, a family, a place where he belonged. If she had already accepted him as her husband in every way that mattered, why hadn't he made it official? A slow smile formed on his lips as he put down his spoon. "I will marry Mommy, sweetheart, but I need your help." The next day, while Larissa was lost in her pottery work, Raymond and Beatrix set up a surprise dinner. Beatrix eagerly ran around the table, making sure every detail was perfect, while Raymond carefully lit the candles and placed a small velvet box in his pocket. When everything was ready, Beatrix rushed into the studio, giggling as she covered her mother's eyes. "Come with me, Mommy, no peeking." Larissa laughed, playfully allowing herself to be led when the blindfold was removed. Her breath hitched at the sight before her. A beautifully set table, warm candlelight, and the man she loved kneeling before her, holding out a ring. "Larissa, you've already given me a family. Now I want to make it complete. Will you marry me?" Tears shimmered in her eyes as she whispered, "Yes." Raymond smiled, then pulled out another small box. Inside was a delicate gold necklace for his little girl. "Sweetheart, this is for you, so you always remember. You'll always be our little princess." 1 month later, under a golden autumn sky, Larissa and Raymond exchanged vows. Beatrix clapped with pure joy as her parents sealed their promise with a kiss. This time, it was forever.